There you go. Yeah, you can go ahead and start, Sherwin.
All right.
Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Harrison Sherwin. You are in just a kind of hour-long-ish introduction into AWS CloudTrail. My day job is I am an AWS technical trainer. I will train both internal, external, and partner audiences in our longer AWS trainings, typically ranging anywhere from 1 day up to 5 days of instruction. I'll teach classes about architecture, systems operations, development. I do some with EKS and some with advanced networking. Within today's session, what's relevant is AWS CloudTrail. So I'm going to go ahead and start. I don't actually have almost any slides prepared for today. And that's kind of intentional, especially within these shorter, more intimate sessions with fewer of you. I like to try to stick more towards what the documentation is showing me and what the actual console is showing me. So I'm actually going to jump completely out of this, but if you do want it, my email is going to be put in the Chime chat. If you have any questions about what I do, or if you have any questions about anything that we are going to go ahead and go through today. So I'm going to show you three different things. I'm going to show you three methods of performing the same action. And this is the first one already on the screen. You're looking at the AWS Management Console, specifically the EC2 dashboard. And in looking at that dashboard, you get a list of the instances I have and some more information about them. I'm going to go ahead and bring up a command line prompt, and I'm going to do AWS EC2 describe instances. And I'm going to have that little command line interface command go for me, and I'm going to get basically the exact same information, telling me in this case just a few more details that the management console was obscuring from me. And then just to completely finalize this, I'm going to show you a final component, and that's right here. It's a very simple Python script. What this Python script is going to do is instantiate a client to EC2 through AWS. And it's going to ask, would you please save the response to the call for EC2 describe instances to some object, some variable, and then print that to the screen. So my question to you, and please answer in chat or off audio if you want. There are a few enough of you. We can absolutely unmute and talk. What do all these things have in common? Besides just describing EC2 instances functionally, what do they have in common? Feel free to be wrong. I'm not going to call you out for, how dare you not know something. And even if it's obvious, tell me how it's obvious. My question, Nigel, is the three things I just showed you: the management console, my command line interface, and the code here for interacting with Python. What do they all have in common? Give me as much as you want or as little as you want. I am looking for a particular answer, but let's talk about it. Yeah, I'm accessing EC2. I'm asking it to describe what instances exist. In the back end, not shown on here, I'm doing this with the same IAM or AWS Identity and Access Management user each time. I've configured keys on my system in order to accomplish that. They're all performing the same action on EC2, absolutely. What about some of the back end on that? Are these three things all doing completely wildly different things to get the same data? they're all going to end up with the same information. Are they going through completely disparate processes in order to do that? You're right, Nigel. They are three different ways to interact with AWS services. What I'm trying to get at is the AWS API, or Application Programming Interface. All three of these options are fancy front ends, fancy interfaces for interacting with that API. That API is accessed through an HTTPS or HTTP endpoint, depending on how you set it up. But functionally, to that back-end AWS API for EC2, these are all actually doing the same thing. They're just different ways to get to that same API call. And that is an important concept to understand when we get to our topic at hand today, CloudTrail. All CloudTrail is a logging system in front and rather working with the AWS APIs. Every time you interact with AWS through any of these different interfaces I've shown you, or you, by the way, can even make direct API calls and skip these interfaces, all of them are just API calls. And all CloudTrail does is log all of those API calls. What's the advantage of doing this? Why would I want to log all of that information? Why do I want to know when Harrison wants to describe the EC2 instances that exist in my AWS account? Tracking, auditing, absolutely, commonly referred to as auditing. We want to understand, typically for a couple different use cases, everything that's happening within our account. We want a complete audit of every action that has been performed within our AWS account, or a subset of those actions. This can be usually accomplished for two different purposes. Fundamentally, it really boils down to two different categories on why I would want to do this: security and compliance. And the two go directly hand in hand, but I bring them out as two different categories intentionally. From a compliance perspective, depending on our industry, depending on the third-party attestations that we want, or maybe we're the government, there are usually some kind of rules in place that dictate that we have to record the things that happen in our account. Someone somewhere is requiring that we record this information just in case something goes wrong, usually. But often that can also go hand in hand with having a large data set of the information that we expect, having a baseline of the activity within our account. And from a security perspective, we can look at all of these audit logs generated to understand when something isn't what we expect. Oh, hey, Harrison's describing EC2 instances. His account has never done that before, and he's had his account for 10 years. He never does that because he's the network administrator and never actually looks directly at the EC2 instances. That's a bad example. Let's switch that up. Maybe Harrison is the database administrator. He only ever works with databases. And suddenly Harrison's account is being used to look at billing information. And this is what CloudTrail is designed to have us look at. So let's bring CloudTrail up on my screen. This is the CloudTrail dashboard. And CloudTrail starts as a trail. What you create in CloudWatch is CloudTrail is called a trail. And a trail is what we use to log those API calls into our account. You start with a name, my trail, and then you need a place to store those logs. Now you can look at up to 90 days of these logs directly in the CloudTrail dashboard. But past that, we need some place to put them. So we're going to put them into our S3 service, our simple storage service. We can either use an existing bucket or we can go create a new bucket. I'm going to use an existing bucket. I'm going to go with, let's do that one right there. And we can put a prefix in front of this information, you know, CloudTrail dash, whatever you want in there. So my logs generated by this CloudTrail trail are going to be stored in S3 in my bucket with this prefix. I can optionally choose to encrypt that data, obscure it from plain text, require access to the keys in order to look at the information. That encryption is handled with AWS KMS, our key management service. I could use an existing key, or I can generate a new one. I can enforce validation of these logs. I want to double check that the checksum is exactly what I expect, that nobody has tampered with the logs directly within CloudTrail. And I can also be notified if I want whenever a new log has been stored. I can also configure our CloudWatch monitoring service to monitor logs as well. This becomes useful because we can have CloudWatch look at the CloudTrail data and take automated actions when we see different API calls performed. We can add our standard key value tagging information in here. And I'm going to click next. Oops, I need to put in an alias. Please ask any questions you have as you come to them in class. Do something like cost center 1279. All right. Now, when we look at all that information about our AWS account, there are three different types of this data that we can choose or not to log as part of our trail. The first is management events. Examples of management events would be to create a new EC2 instance, terminate a database, ask for a new IP CIDR block with your VPC. Things that change your AWS resources. Data events are going to be things, and I'm actually going to give you the documentation page that describes exactly what a data event is within CloudTrail. But it's primarily looking at things where the data itself is distinct from the AWS resource. So let me give you some solid concrete examples there. When we're working with Amazon S3, if we create a bucket, that's a management event. If we set up a lifecycle policy to automatically delete objects after 30 days, that is a management event. However, actually deleting an object or putting an object in, that is considered a data event. Some other examples might be when working with DynamoDB. When we want to put, delete, or update data within DynamoDB, that would also be a data event. Do you have a question, George? Let me take that. All right. So I put that information on what data events is in there. A relatively new feature for CloudTrail is called Insights. CloudTrail Insights is designed to get a more historical perspective of all those calls we're making and allow us to detect autonomously if anything is out of what we expect. I can show some examples of that. I've talked a little bit about you've never made this API call before. We'll talk about some of that a little bit later. We can also choose what types of API activities we want to log for our management events, reads, writes, exclude things related to encryption, exclude things related to RDS data. Review it, click create. Now I already have a trail in my account that I am enforced to have from an AWS corporate perspective. And it is going to go through and look at all of my different data that's stored in here. So I can look at these different API calls that have been made in two different places. I can look at them directly in S3, or I can look at them through the CloudTrail dashboard. And you can see that one right here. So what's this right here? This is an example API call. It looks like the username Harrison logged into the console. Shocking, I know. I had to log into the console before I started doing this for you. And it's going to show me information about that. When did Harrison log in? At 9:29 a.m. this morning, Mountain Time for me in Colorado. I specifically wasn't talking to EC2 or RDS or S3. I was talking to the sign-in. I wanted to perform a sign-in. I signed in from this public IP address into the Northern Virginia region, and I could go and view even more information about that. And this is what we call the event record. This is what actually is being stored by CloudTrail in that S3 bucket for you. It is JSON formatted or JavaScript object notation. You can see some of that information directly. I am an AWS IAM user as part of this AWS account. My name is Harrison. That is what my username is. I logged into US East 1 from this IP address. Here's information about my system. I'm using Chrome. I'm on a Windows 10 system with a 64-bit architecture. Was I able to successfully log in? Yes, I was. So if you have somebody attempting to brute force through your password into AWS, you'll get a console login of not success. So you can also look at calls not only that actually did something, but calls that were denied. Sally, the database administrator, attempted to delete a database, but she was unsuccessful, likely because IAM policies prevented her from doing that. So it doesn't just log what was successful, it also logs what was unsuccessful. I'm logged into the management console through this specific URL. I did not use multi-factor authentication. I did not use my phone in order to do it. And then we have details like the event ID that gives a unique identifier to every single API call made. And all of that is stored in S3. It goes into two different folders. CloudTrail is the logs themselves. CloudTrail Digest, let me give you that page. That is going to tell you the names of log files that were delivered to S3 buckets within a certain period of time. because especially in our larger accounts, we are going to generate a lot of data within here. There's going to be a lot of things stored within here. And we can actually see if we go to my bucket level information. Yeah, bucket metrics here. I am storing 1 million different objects, and it increases every day. It looks like it's increasing by about 2,000 objects, 2,000 different logs a day. 2,000. And guess what? This isn't a production level account. This is just my little demo account that I use to teach classes. I wasn't even really using it over those last few days. And I am storing almost about 2.5 gigabytes of data in the account. So let's go jump over just so you get a chance to look at it. We can set up trails that work across multiple accounts, so that's why I had to select my account name. Our logs are stored by region. Mine is set up to go across all regions that my account uses. Year, month, date, and then it's all stored as JSON.gz files, usually about the size you see on the screen. So that's where it's getting stored. I wanted to show you some other examples of what these API calls as they're logged are going to look like. So here we have another one. User Alice in account 12345678910 is attempting to do something. What is Alice trying to do? Alice is trying to start some EC2 instances in US East 2, the Ohio region. Alice is coming from this IP address, and that IP address, that source IP address, that gives us a lot of information to detect if something's gone wrong. If Alice usually only ever accesses the account from her home computer and the office, there's not going to be a large list of public IP addresses that Alice is coming from. And so if Alice spontaneously starts logging in from very different IPs that are associated with some other country that Alice does not work in, this might be cause for concern. That might be information we want to look at, especially when you start correlating it with things like, well, how did Alice log in? Was she logging in from the command line interface? Was she logging in from the management console? How does she usually access these things? And we can see a pattern of data that comes about. In this case, Alice was using the EC2 API tools. So if Alice almost never uses those, and she never comes from this IP address, we can get an idea of, well, maybe that's a problem. Maybe Alice has been compromised. And maybe we need to reset Alice's password, reset her keys. And we can also use IAM policies that will say that Alice has to come from a subset of IP addresses that we provide. So Alice was attempting to start some instances. As part of that call, she was attempting to start this particular instance ID in EC2. And what was the result of that? We send a response to all of our API calls. This was the response that Alice received. Alice received a response that the instance moved from a state of stopped, that was the previous state, and it is now in a current state of pending, meaning it's right before it started. And it would then move into a state of running if we did describe instances maybe in a couple minutes later. So we can see who is asking for what, from where, how, and what the result was every time. This service is one of our most commonly used services because it's going to record information about all these different things. Our customers want to know what's happening in their account. It gives them information about if they've been compromised. They might be required to record this information, but it can also set a pattern as a data set of what are we actually doing in our account? What are the common implementations that have been used? Got one more example to show you here. This is one where we actually get an error as a response. So I wanted to show you an example of when it doesn't go exactly right. So Alice is still the one trying to do something. Alice is still accessing from a source IP. What she is attempting to do is update a trail. Oh, Alice is trying to do something specifically with CloudTrail. Alice is attempting to do this with Python on Windows 7. Right? So what Alice tried to do was update a trail, and she said she wanted to update the trail named MyTrail2. The problem is Alice is going to get an error code. That trail was not found, meaning that trail doesn't exist in the account. So consequently, it didn't work. So that is the error message that will happen. There will be no response elements because Alice will instead be returned the error message. Any questions there so far? Feel free to come off mute if you'd like, or put your questions into chat. Can you set an email alert from CloudTrail if a user does not have admin privileges trying to log in to an admin server? Does not have admin privileges and they're trying to log into an admin server. It would depend on what you mean by admin server there. If you mean something running on EC2, it would then depend on how they're trying to log into it. So if they're just going across a public IP address for that EC2 instance, you're using something like SSH or RDP, that's not an AWS API call. You're not modifying any AWS resources there. So in that case, the answer would be no. However, let's still assume we need to access it as an EC2 instance. Let's assume that that's what you mean with admin server, because I don't see you correcting me in chat. The way around that is to use another service, and that's called AWS Systems Manager. Systems Manager is designed as a very large service for systems operations on AWS. It has a feature called Session Manager. And Session Manager can allow us to have connections to our EC2 instances that don't go across public IPs, that don't go through publicly available SSH and holes in our security groups and other firewalls. So what we can look at for that is to enforce with Session Manager that all SSH connections must go through that service. And Session Manager will actually log every single call made through the session to those instances as an entry within CloudTrail. So let me actually show you. I've got an EC2 instance here. It is available on this public IP address. All right. But if you look in my security groups for it, and let me give you that, I'll have to go to security. And you'll note I do not have an open rule for SSH or RDP or any other thing that would allow me to, quote, log in, unquote, to the instance. But I can still go to connect and use Session Manager. Now, Session Manager requires that an agent is installed on the EC2 instance. There are some IAM policies you have to set up. You'd want to look more into Systems Manager documentation or that. But I want to show you what it can specifically log. So this call that I just did to do the connect, that would be logged in CloudTrail. And you can control who's allowed to perform that action. And now I am logged into the EC2 instance. Let's call this our admin server. And everything I do through this method of accessing CloudTrail, that will all be logged as a call within CloudTrail. So present working directory, list what I've got, ping amazon.com. All of that will be logged in CloudTrail. It won't show up immediately in CloudTrail. CloudTrail is not designed to be a system where you immediately see everything that's done. If you need immediate action, that'll be set up through CloudWatch. But CloudTrail will, after 10, 15 minutes-ish, take all of that information and store it. I liked that question. I like all questions, though. Questions keep us from being bored sitting here watching Harrison talk all day. Most services work with CloudTrail, almost all of them. Last I checked, the official number was 212 plus. Almost all of them are supported with CloudTrail. On my screen, you'll see the list of those that aren't. AWS Import, Macie Classic, and the price list service. It'll also be for services that don't have public API operations. That's a very limited list there, but you can see that list. So if it's not on this list, it's supported with CloudTrail. Another limitation I wanted to show you. So let me log all the way out. When we normally log in as an IAM user, we specify an account ID, a username, and a password, or we would use keys and some kind of account ID. If I log in this way, successfully or failure, that is logged in CloudTrail. The reason we can log it even on a failure, even though we're not into the account yet, is because we know which account you're trying to log into. So let's do something like that. Click sign in. Yeah, that's unsuccessful. That will be logged. Harrison attempted to log in at this time, and it was unsuccessful. The thing that is unsuccessful that won't necessarily be logged is logging in with the root user's email address. When you try to log in as the root user successfully, that is logged because we know what account you're trying to go to. But let's say normally the email you have associated is that with your account, but you make a typo. You try to log into hasheryamazon.com. And it says, oh, are you sure you want to do this? So we'll do the CAPTCHA. That doesn't exist. So in this case, because if I typo, I don't actually know what AWS account you were trying to get into. So that would not be logged in CloudTrail. Nigel's got a question in chat here. How do you monitor for CloudTrail anomalies without using Insights? You said it was a new feature. How is this accomplished before Insights? You could use other automated tools that exist out there. There are third-party and AWS partner tools that could accomplish some of that. You could build in logic using CloudWatch and your own code that you write through AWS Lambda. And there are a lot of security services that will also monitor those data sets as well. So that would be things like, I believe GuardDuty is the name of that service that would accomplish that, but check me on that. I'm pretty sure it's GuardDuty. And let me just double check that while I'm here. Yeah, I'm right on that. That's GuardDuty. Good, I know what I'm talking about. You suppose that anything that could deal with JSON could perform the actions Insights does? Absolutely. Yes. Anything that could parse JSON could also look at that data as well. You could use things like Amazon Athena to parse all that data stored in S3, look at that JSON, and make actions based on queries from Amazon Athena. Any kind of workflow where you can perform queries against JSON, where you can write your own code to parse it, anything like that could have accomplished it. Insights is just designed to make it easier so you don't have to bring in all those other pieces. While I'm thinking about it, here is the broader documentation pages for interacting with CloudTrail. I've shown you a little bit of the links from the user guide. There is also an API reference if you want to interact with CloudTrail programmatically. Make an API calls yourself, write in code to interact with CloudTrail. So something like AWS CloudTrail, scribe trails. Show me the list of trails that exist in my account. Nothing really new here. I just wanted to show you don't have to interact with CloudTrail from the dashboard. And yes, API calls to CloudTrail are also logged in CloudTrail. One of the reasons that we group those logs together that we store in S3 is to prevent an infinite logging loop, because putting things in S3 would be an event you can track with CloudTrail. So CloudTrail will be just constantly logging over and over and over again if we set it up that everything was immediately seen and immediately stored. By grouping things together roughly every 10 to 15 minutes or so, it becomes a lot more manageable. You still have an infinite logging loop, but it becomes a lot smaller, a lot more manageable. While CloudTrail can do an awful lot for us within our account, fundamentally, I've shown you now every aspect of it. It's going to log all those API calls if we set it up to do that, and allow us to look at that data. Looking at that data would be done with tools like CloudTrail Insights, or it would be done with other tools like CloudWatch, third-party tools, integration with the Lambda or Athena. Where CloudTrail becomes very powerful is when you build it in with these other tools to perform the analysis on what's happening within your account. But that's a little bit beyond the scope of an introduction into CloudTrail. Any other questions? All right. If you don't have any questions, that's all I've got for you. CloudTrail isn't the world's most complicated service. It's one of our actually easier services to understand and to teach how it's working, how it's interacting within an hour. It's a little bit unique in that way that I can cover just about everything of it within an hour. If you have any other questions, I'll absolutely stick around, but that's all the content I have for you from this point. My name has been Harrison Sherwin. I'm an AWS technical trainer. It has been my absolute pleasure. Email me with any questions you have. Come off mute and ask me any questions now or throw them in the chat. Raguraj, did you add anything before people start dropping off?
No, I'm good. It's pretty good.
You are most welcome, Nigel.
Thank you, Harrison, for a wonderful session.
Pleasure. You are most welcome, Greg. Don. My pleasure, Dorcas. Hope you learned something. All right. I don't think we're going to get any other questions, so I'm going to go ahead and drop off then. Everyone have a great weekend. Almost there.
Thank you. You do the same. Thanks,
Yes,
everyone.
this session was recorded, Hetty.
Yes.